The night it started, the snow had already buried the lodge sign past the halfway mark. You could barely see the end of the parking lot through the gusts, and somewhere in the distance, something was knocking. Not hard, not fast, just slow, hollow thuds. I thought it was the wind throwing tree branches against the siding again, but the noise kept coming, always 3 knocks, then silence, then 3 more, always from somewhere different. The guests were asleep, or at least they were supposed to be. Let me know where you're listening from tonight, and if you've ever stayed in a place that felt off. And if these stories help pass the quiet hours, feel free to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I'm Dana Ellis. I was 37 then, working the night shift at a small lodge up in the Rockies just outside of Ouray. We didn't get many guests that far up in winter, which suited me fine. I liked the quiet, the wind through the pines, the creak of the old plumbing, the dull hum of the baseboard heaters that never really did the job. I'd taken the job after my divorce, needed a change. Something slower, simpler. The manager lived down the hill and only came up a few days a week. That left just me and Len Turner, our overnight maintenance guy, a gruff but kind man who looked like he'd been carved from bark and duct tape. He handled broken heaters and frozen pipes. I handled the front desk, coffee check-ins, and calls from rooms where the TV remote didn't work. It was January 2014, a bad snow season, and the lodge was mostly empty. That Tuesday, we had just 4 rooms occupied, 2 traveling nurses, a retired couple, and a solo guest who'd arrived late without a reservation. He was the one I still think about. The man who signed his name in a loose, almost hesitant script. First name, unreadable last name, looked like Graham or Grannon. He never clarified. He checked in just after 10 p.m., paid in cash, and barely said a word. He'd come in through the north entrance boots, crusted with snow hair, soaked under a hooded coat that looked older than I was. No luggage, just a canvas messenger bag slung over his shoulder. I offered coffee, but he declined. Asked for a quiet room. Didn't care about the view or the size. Just something facing away from the road. I gave him room 6, 2nd floor. End of the hall, one of our colder rooms but the quietest. He took the key, nodded once, and headed up the stairs without another word. Never asked for Wi-Fi. Never asked for anything. About an hour later, Len radioed in from the boiler room to say the old panel near room 8 was acting up again. Heat in that section would be patchy for the night. I went upstairs to post a note on the door, let the guests know we were working on it. I knocked softly on each of the 3 occupied rooms. The older couple in room 7 answered, smiling politely in their robes. The nurses in room 8 were already bundled in flannel and watching some late-night cooking show. But when I knocked on room 6, there was no reply. Not unusual. Some guests are heavy sleepers. I left the note and went back downstairs. Around 2:30 a.m., I was in the office making another pot of coffee when I heard footsteps upstairs. Light, slow moving across the hall from room 6 toward the south stairwell. I glanced at the monitor. We had one old grainy camera pointed at the 2nd floor hallway. On the screen, I saw the back of the quiet man's coat, barely visible in the corner heading down the stairs. I figured he was stepping out for a smoke. I made a note to check the door sensor in the morning. But here's the thing, that door never opened. At least the log didn't show it. All outside entries and exits had magnetic locks that recorded every use, and there was nothing from 2 a.m. to 5:45 when Len clocked in. That should have been the first sign, but I brushed it off. The next night, the snow got worse. Nearly 2 feet fell between dusk and dawn. No check-ins, no calls, nothing but wind. Around midnight, I checked the logs. Room 6 still hadn't used any amenities. No hot water, no lights triggered, no phone calls made. I called up just to make sure he was still okay. After 4 rings, someone picked up, but they didn't speak. I could hear breathing, faint, steady, like someone standing just inches from the receiver. I said hello twice, then I hung up. I told myself maybe he was asleep and knocked the phone off the hook. Maybe he answered by reflex. Still, something about that silence felt deliberate. The next morning, I asked Len to do a quick check on the room while I handled the laundry. He knocked. No answer. He opened the door and found the bed still made. Bathroom untouched. Window locked from the inside. The room was freezing, like the heat had never kicked on, like no one had ever been there. But the key was gone, taken from the hook at the front desk and never returned. That night, Len and I sat in the office and went over the security footage again. Sure enough, the man entered through the north door at 10:04 p.m. on Tuesday. He took the stairs up to the second floor. We see him turn down the hall, and then nothing. He's never seen on camera again. No door opens. No one comes down the stairs. We checked every camera angle. Nothing. It was like he vanished between frames. A day later, another storm rolled in, and we had to close for weather. Just before we shut down, I did a final sweep of the guest logs, and something hit me. Room 6 had no prior guests that month, but when I opened the ledger to double-check, I saw something I hadn't written. A name scratched faintly beneath the man's. Same last name, different first name. It looked older. Faded ink, different pen. Same room. The date, January 12, 2009. Exactly 5 years earlier. Same day, same room. I brought it to Len, but he shook his head. "You know how many times I've fixed the heater in that room," he said. "And not once have I seen anyone actually stay in there more than a few hours." We stopped renting room 6 after that. The manager didn't argue, just said it was drafty and not worth the complaints. But I still think about that man. The way he stared at the stairs before going up. The way he answered the phone and never spoke. The way that room never warmed up, no matter how high we cranked the heat. Sometimes late at night when the snow hits the windows just right, I still hear those 3 knocks. Always soft. Always just before the wind starts up again. And I never know which door it's coming from. I don't usually talk about it. People think warehouse jobs are dull, just forklifts and inventory scanners and long hours under flickering lights. And they're mostly right, except for that one winter. Back in 2019, I was working 3rd shift as a night manager at a shipping warehouse in Allentown. I'd been there almost a decade by then. Mostly freight logistics we handled, overflow from the bigger terminals in Philly. We had a dozen guys on the night crew, mostly dependable, mostly. Quiet, same rotation for years. I liked the routine. It was cold, isolated work, but it kept me busy, and I didn't mind the silence once the loading docks settled down. That December, right after Christmas, we brought in a new guy. His name was Wesley. Looked about 30, maybe a few years younger. Real polite, but off somehow. Not dangerous, just out of rhythm with everyone else. He answered questions like he was reciting them, smiled too long, kept his coat on even while unloading pallets, which wasn't easy work in a place with busted heaters. Still, he showed up on time, didn't complain, and always stayed late when I asked. So, I let it be. The first thing I noticed was the way he always parked in the far corner of the lot. We had plenty of space right near the main doors, but every night his dusty blue sedan would be backed into the farthest spot under the one lamp that never worked. I asked him about it once, just casually, and he said, "I don't like having people behind me." That was all. Weird, but not my business. Around the second week of his shift, one of the regular guys, Tony, came up to me during break and asked if Wesley was a temp or from corporate. I told him he was just a regular hire. Tony frowned and said, "Then how come he already knew where everything was?" I didn't know what he meant, so he told me. Apparently, on Wesley's second night, Tony had caught him standing at the back of the dry goods section, staring at a locked cage where we kept spare keys, manifests, that sort of thing. When Tony asked if he needed help, Wesley just said, "I was seeing if anything had changed." That phrasing stuck with me. Had changed. Like he'd been there before. But he hadn't. I would have remembered we're not a revolving door. Then came the incident with the boxes. I got a call around 3:15 a.m. from our motion sensors. 2 pallets in the outbound aisle had been tipped over, nothing major, but enough to trip the alarm. When I checked the footage, I expected to see some guy backing into a stack by accident. Instead, I saw Wesley. He was standing perfectly still between 2 shelving rows facing the security camera. Not moving, just staring. The footage showed him like that for 4 full minutes before he stepped back, turned, and walked out of frame. No pallets knocked over, no movement near the boxes. And yet the sensors went off and the pallets were down. I confronted him about it the next shift. Showed him the log, asked if he'd seen anything unusual. He said, "It's always between 3:12 and 3:18. That's when they try things. That's when who tries what I asked." He just shrugged and said, "Not important, not yet." That's when I decided to check his hiring file. I found his name, birth date, and resume looked clean. But something felt wrong. The emergency contact line was left blank. So I ran a quick query through the access logs just to see what times he'd been entering and exiting. And that's when things really started to go sideways. Wesley had been logging in under different badge codes. Not stolen old ones. Ones from employees who hadn't worked there in years. One of them, Jackson Hill, had died in 2015. Car crash off I-78. I remember attending the funeral. Yet Wesley had scanned in under Jackson's old code just 4 nights earlier. I didn't say anything at first. I figured maybe it was a glitch, bad records, or duplicate cards in the system. I sent a maintenance request to our security vendor and tried to push it out of my mind. But then that Friday, something happened I still don't fully understand. It was about 2:45 a.m., cold enough that your breath looked solid and the concrete floor had a layer of mist near the walls. I was doing a walkthrough when I noticed the shipping bay lights were off. That's not normal. We leave them on overnight for safety. As I got closer, I could hear something, not footsteps, not talking. It was a low, scraping sound, like cardboard being dragged across cement. I stepped into the bay and saw Wesley crouched behind one of the sorting tables. He wasn't working. He was tracing something on the floor with his finger. I couldn't see what it was at first, but when I got closer, I realized he'd drawn some kind of symbol in the dust. Circular, repeating lines, almost like a maze. I asked what he was doing. He looked up at me and said, "Trying to reset the boundary. They keep moving it." That was the last straw. I told him to clock out and wait for me in the office. He didn't argue, just stood, dusted off his knees, and walked off like it didn't matter. I called the night supervisor, told him we had a situation, and I was going to hold Wesley's final paycheck until we verified everything. I printed his badge log again just to be sure. This time there were 3 different names attached to his credentials. None of them matched Wesley Miller. That's when I called the cops. Officer Brewster showed up around 4:30. Older guy used to dealing with late-night nonsense, but you could tell this one put him on edge. We walked the whole building, showed him the footage, the logbook, the symbol on the floor, which by then had been wiped clean. But Wesley was gone. No car in the lot. No sign of him on any camera since I'd seen him in the bay. The only thing we found was his jacket folded neatly on the back of a chair in the break room, his keycard tucked inside the left pocket. Brewster ran his plates, his name, everything. The license on file came back invalid. Social wasn't tied to anyone active. His name wasn't real. 3 days later, we got a notice from corporate. A short memo saying the security firm had identified and corrected several badge assignment errors. That was all. No follow-up, no questions. I still work nights, same job, same routes. But I don't trust the logs anymore. And I keep a copy of the camera footage from that night saved on an old USB drive. Just in case someone ever asks, because I know what I saw. Wesley Miller, or whatever his name really was, didn't come to that warehouse by accident. And I don't think he ever really left. Back in 2004, our neighborhood still felt like the kind of place where nothing really happened. A mix of 2-story homes and cul-de-sacs, kids riding bikes, sprinklers going in the summer. We were about 20 minutes south of Denver, tucked between 2 highways and a patch of open fields that hadn't been developed yet. My mom called it a quiet little corner of nowhere, which was exactly why they bought the house. At 16, I was old enough to be bored by it, but not yet old enough to see how fast things can change. It started with the van. I remember because it showed up the day after school let out for summer break. A white panel van, no windows on the back, no business logos, just this faded rectangle where a sticker must have been scraped off years ago. It wasn't parked in front of any one house, just kind of shifted around the block every couple of days. One morning it would be near the Andersons' driveway, the next day, at the end of the cul-de-sac, near the empty lot. It never seemed to stay in the same place more than one night. The first time I really noticed it, I was walking the dog around 9 p.m. The sun had dipped below the rooftops, but the sky still held that deep orange that lasts about 20 minutes in Colorado. As we passed the van, I saw someone in the driver's seat, a shape, not a face. I thought they might wave or nod, but they didn't move. Not even when the dog barked. Just sat there, not running the engine, no lights on, watching. I didn't think much of it at the time. Figured maybe someone waiting on a friend. People park weirdly sometimes. But then it kept happening. Every evening, no matter which way I walked or how late I left the van, was always somewhere along my route. And whoever was inside never got out, never opened a door, just sat still, engine off. I mentioned it to my mom once while she was unloading groceries, but she waved it off, probably a contractor on a job, maybe someone fixing up the new houses at the edge of the subdivision. That made sense, so I let it go. The real shift happened a few weeks in. It was July. One of those evenings when the heat doesn't break even after sunset. My parents were out at a work dinner and I was home alone, supposed to be finishing summer reading, but mostly flipping through TV channels. Around 10:15, the power flickered. Not out completely, just a quick dimming like someone breathing in. A second later, the lights returned to normal. I checked the breakers just in case, but everything looked fine. I figured someone down the block probably tripped something. Then the phone rang. It was the landline, not my cell, which we almost never used. I answered out of habit. There was silence at first, then a click. Not a hang-up, more like someone adjusting their grip on the receiver. I said hello again, and this time a voice answered quiet and oddly calm. A man. He said, "You're alone right now. Don't go near the window." Then the line went dead. I stood there for a long minute, phone still pressed to my ear even after the dial tone kicked in. I didn't know whether to laugh it off or lock the doors. I did both. I checked every lock, turned off the TV, and sat in the hallway where no windows could see me. I tried calling my parents, but it went straight to voicemail. I was debating whether to call 911 when I heard the sound of tires on pavement. Not fast, just a slow roll like a car creeping past. I crawled over to the edge of the hallway and peeked around the corner. The van was parked in front of our house, not moving, lights off, no one visible in the front seat. I remember thinking maybe it had been there the whole time and I just hadn't noticed. But it hadn't. I knew that. It wasn't there when I let the dog out earlier. I watched it from behind the curtain for what must have been 20 minutes. Then without warning, the headlights blinked on not high beams, just a flash. Once. Then nothing. A few seconds later, it drove off. I didn't sleep that night. When my parents got home, I told them everything. My mom was quiet, my dad went out and looked around, but of course, the van was gone. They said if I saw it again to get a plate number. The next day, we called the non-emergency police line. The officer said they'd send a car through the neighborhood in the evenings, just in case. But the patrols didn't change anything. The van kept showing up. And then it got worse. One afternoon, I came home from my friend Chris's house and found a folded piece of paper stuck between our front door and the screen. It wasn't addressed to anyone, just plain paper folded neatly. Inside was a single sentence written in thick marker. "Your schedule is predictable. That's good." I felt my stomach drop. I didn't tell my parents about the note. I should have, but something about it made me feel like it was already too late, like telling anyone would only confirm what the writer already knew. A few nights later, the motion light in our backyard clicked on around 2 a.m. I was awake, couldn't sleep, and looked through the blinds. I couldn't see anyone, just the empty yard, the faint shape of the fence, and the cold white of the floodlight. But when I checked the grass in the morning, I found a shoe print, just one, clear as day near the edge of the patio, too big to be mine, definitely not from my dad's boots. It faced the house. That morning I finally broke and told them everything, the note, the phone call, the lights. My mom called the police again, this time more forcefully. A uniformed officer came out to take a report. His name was Sergeant Williams. Middle-aged, calm, didn't talk down to me. He took the print, walked the block, even canvassed a few neighbors. One older woman down the street said she'd seen the van too, said it sometimes sat outside her house for hours without moving. Then Williams told us something strange. He said there had been reports of similar vans around the Denver metro area in the past few months. No plates, no identifying marks, just sitting in residential streets at odd hours. No crimes attached, just presence, always watching. Always just enough to unsettle, but never enough to prosecute. He promised to escalate it to their regional unit, but that was the last I ever saw of him. That weekend, my dad drove me 2 hours north to stay with my uncle in Fort Collins for a while. They didn't say it directly, but I could tell they weren't just worried. They were scared. The night before we left, I looked out my bedroom window one last time. The street was empty. I remember feeling relief, but as we pulled out of the driveway the next morning, I saw it. The van, parked behind a utility truck near the end of the block. Driver's side window half rolled down. A person in the front seat, head turned slightly. Toward our car as we passed, no smile, no gesture, just watching. 3 weeks later, my parents sold the house. I never saw the van again. But sometimes if I wake up in the middle of the night and peek through the blinds, I find myself expecting to see headlights flicker once and go dark, just once, and then silence. I don't know what made me look out the window that night. It wasn't a noise. Nothing moved. It was just a strange stillness in the hallway, like the air shifted. And when I looked through the blinds, I saw the front porch light swinging back and forth, but there was no wind. The trees were still, the grass didn't move. Just that single bulb swaying faint shadows stretching across the siding, and the shape of a man standing at the base of the porch stairs. He wasn't looking at the house. He was looking up at the window I was standing behind. That was the third night of my stay. I had booked a last-minute beach rental in South Carolina, a quiet little town called Havel's Neck, about an hour south of Charleston. I'd been dealing with burnout and the idea of off-season quiet warm air, and the ocean just a few blocks away seemed like exactly what I needed. I found a listing on Airbnb that looked old-fashioned, but clean yellow clapboard house, screened porch, walking distance to everything. The reviews were all kind and mentioned the host by name, Miss Ruth. People said she was sweet helpful, maybe a little old-fashioned, but always left fresh towels and banana bread. When I pulled in, she was waiting on the porch in a blue housecoat and pink slippers. She waved with both hands like someone greeting a family member they hadn't seen in years. We made small talk while she handed over the keys, actual brass ones, not a digital lock. She said the Wi-Fi was spotty cell service, could drop at night, and that I should let her know if the porch swing started creaking without anyone in it. "It does that sometimes," she said with a wink. Old wood and ghosts. I thought she was joking. The first night was uneventful. Quiet. I took a walk around the block before bed, got caught in a brief mist that smelled like salt and pine, then dried off and watched something mindless until I fell asleep. I don't even remember hearing any traffic, just the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant sound of waves. The second night, I noticed something odd. The back door, the one that led to the fenced yard and outdoor shower, was unlocked. I hadn't used it. I was sure of that. I keep track of those things. I clicked it shut and turned the bolt, assuming Miss Ruth might have used it while cleaning before I arrived. Still, I tested it twice before I went to bed. That was the night I woke up at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of the front screen door clicking open. Not slamming, not creaking, just a soft, definite sound, that metallic click of a screen door unlatching. I sat up in bed, listening, not even breathing. I waited for footsteps. A knock, anything. But there was nothing else, no movement, no light outside the window, just the stillness again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night, and by morning I had convinced myself it was wind, or maybe an animal. The house was old. Old houses make noises. But on the third night I saw him. I had just turned off the lamp in the living room and was heading down the hallway when I felt that stillness again, a kind of pause in the air, like the world was holding its breath. I walked to the window without thinking, just drawn there. I pushed the slats of the blinds apart and saw the porch light swaying side to side. And that man, standing motionless at the bottom of the steps. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just a long-sleeved shirt and jeans, even though the air had cooled down since sundown. His face was tipped slightly down, but I could tell he was looking right at me. I stepped back from the window quickly, heart hammering in my throat. I waited, listened. The swing didn't move. The screen door didn't click, but the light kept swaying. The next morning, I walked to the little gas station a few blocks down and asked the guy at the counter if he'd seen anyone hanging around the area lately, someone maybe staying in town short term. He was in his late 50s, wearing a shell polo that had seen better days and looked like he didn't love tourists. Still, he nodded when I described the man. Saw him standing across the street from here a couple nights ago, he said, not looking up from the register. Didn't buy anything, just watched the place for a while, then walked off. I asked if he knew where the guy went. He just shrugged and handed me my change. That night I made sure every lock was secured. I wedged a kitchen chair under the doorknob of the back door. I closed the bedroom curtains, fully turned on the bathroom fan to drown out small noises, and kept my phone plugged in beside me. I told myself I'd drive home in the morning. Whatever relaxation I came here for wasn't worth this lingering unease. At 2:47 a.m., I woke up to the sound of the swing creaking. Not the fan, not the trees, not some passing car. The porch swing. Slow, deliberate, forward and back. The sound was unmistakable. I sat up, heart thudding, and stared at the closed curtain. I didn't want to look, but I had to know. When I pulled the curtain back, he was sitting on the swing, not rocking, not staring, just sitting there, like it was his place and always had been. One hand rested on the arm of the swing. The other was holding something in his lap. I couldn't make out what. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Then he turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see that he was smiling. I backed away from the window, grabbed my phone, and called 911. It took a few rings to connect. The dispatcher said the nearest unit was 20 minutes out, maybe more. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, my shoes, and the bag I'd never fully unpacked. I left the chair at the back door, ran to my car, and peeled out of the driveway without looking back. I stayed in a hotel in Charleston that night, checked in under a different name. Left the Airbnb a review the next morning. Clean, good location Wi-Fi worked fine, but be aware of a man lingering around the porch at night. Miss Ruth never replied. She didn't refund anything either. A few weeks later, I got curious and pulled up the listing again. It was gone. I searched her name. Nothing. The house address didn't show up on any rentals. I eventually found a photo of it through a property site, grainy and outdated, and noticed something I hadn't remembered. The front porch swing was missing. I still don't know what he was holding in his lap that night. I think about it more than I should. It was small, square, and pale colored. Could have been a photo. Could have been a folded note. Could have been a key. The first time I noticed the pattern, I was too tired to think much of it. I'd been up late working on a coding project and thought I was just imagining things, the sound of slow footsteps in the hallway around 3 a.m., followed by a knock 2 doors down. Then silence. No voices, no movement. Just one knock, then nothing. I figured someone was drunk or at the wrong apartment. But it happened again the next night, and the one after that. I lived alone back then in a small off-campus building about 10 minutes from the university. It was one of those older brick apartment blocks built in the 70s, 4 floors, 1 main hallway, per level single entrance, in the front laundry in the basement. My place was on the 2nd floor, Unit 1C. Rent was cheap, which is how I could afford it on a part-time campus job and freelance tech gigs. Most of the residents kept to themselves. Grad students, a few older tenants, a quiet man named Mr. Conley in Unit 1A right across from me. I barely ever saw him, but he was polite when we passed. In the hallway, nodded, never talked much, just nodded. The knocking started in November, sometime after midterms. It was always between 2:40 and 3:10 a.m., never louder than a firm tap. It never happened to my door. Always Unit 1A. Once per night, just once. Sometimes I'd hear faint breathing or a whisper I couldn't quite make out, but nothing more. No one ever answered. Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. One night I left my lights off and cracked the door open just an inch when I heard the knock. I stayed quiet, breathing shallow, and watched through the sliver of darkness. There was someone standing outside Mr. Conley's door, a tall figure in a coat, back turned toward me, unmoving. The hallway light flickered once, and when it came back steady, the figure was gone. The next morning, I checked with the leasing office to see if maybe someone was coming in late, like a friend or family member of a tenant. The manager said no visitors had been logged. He said Unit 1A hadn't had a guest in months. Said Mr. Conley was a quiet guy, paid on time, kept to himself. He paused then, frowning slightly, and said something that stuck with me. He's got a do not disturb note on file. Doesn't want us coming in unless it's a real emergency. The following week, the pattern changed. 2 knocks, then a whisper. Still no answer. Still no movement from inside. One night I waited with the door cracked wider. This time I saw the figure walk in from the stairwell, tall again, but not the same build. The gait was wrong. This person moved slower, limping slightly, like one leg dragged. I couldn't see their face. They stopped at Unit 1A, raised a hand, and knocked twice, then stood there for almost a full minute before walking back toward the stairs. When they passed under the exit light, I saw something odd. They weren't wearing shoes. After that, the pattern broke completely. One night it was 3 knocks. Another night I counted 4. Sometimes 2 people came. I could hear the shuffle of feet. Then one night they knocked on my door. Just once. I didn't move. I sat in the dark on the edge of my bed, listening to the faint creak of floorboards just outside. They didn't knock again. The next morning, I decided to knock on Mr. Conley's door myself. I hadn't seen him in over 2 weeks. There was no response. The hallway was cold, smelled faintly like mildew. I waited a moment, then walked away. That afternoon, I called the property office, asked if they'd done a wellness check recently. The woman on the phone was confused. She said the apartment had been empty since October. Mr. Conley moved out almost 2 months ago, she said. We haven't leased it to anyone yet. I asked her to double-check. I told her I'd seen him, heard people knocking. She called me back 20 minutes later, said she went down and checked herself. Apartment 1A was locked, blinds drawn, no sign of occupancy. She said the place still had old furniture stacked inside the kind they use for staging. That night, I stayed awake in the living room, lights off, watching the peephole. At exactly 2:47 a.m., I heard it again, a single knock on Unit 1A. I opened my door silently, stepped into the hallway, and found no one there. The next day, I went to the police. Not because I thought it was dangerous, more because I needed to be sure I wasn't going crazy. The officer I spoke to was an older guy named Lyman. Thin, soft-spoken. He took down my statement, then asked a few quiet questions of his own. Did the knocks ever come at exactly the same time, he asked. Did they ever stop for a few days and then return? I told him yes. He looked down at his notes for a long time before telling me he'd been called to that building before. Years ago. Said there'd been a case involving that unit, a man who lived alone and passed away, but no one noticed for nearly a month. The tenants on either side had reported odd sounds. Knocking, whispers, and every time they investigated, the hallway would be empty. Before I left, Officer Lyman gave me a strange warning. If they knock on your door again, he said, don't open it. Don't even answer. Just stay still. And if it happens a third time, move out. I asked what he meant. He just shook his head and said, some doors remember who used to live behind them. Some people come back because they never knew they left. I broke my lease the next week, moved in with a friend across town. I never told my landlord why. Sometimes when I'm lying awake in a quiet room, I still imagine the sound. That soft knock, always between 2:40 and 3:10. Never loud, never urgent, just someone remembering a door that used to open. I still have the strip of photos somewhere in a drawer. The edges have curled from heat or age, and the colors are a little off now, too red like sunburn. But it's not the colors that bother me. It's what's in the fourth frame. I never saw it that night. None of us did. Back then, the state fair was the last big thing before the cold set in. I was 18, trying to stretch out the last days of summer before we all went our separate ways. Charlie had just gotten a beat-up Honda Civic, so he drove, and Denny sat in the back with a blanket over his lap like an old man. We joked around most of the drive, windows down, music too loud, but that all stopped once we got there. The fairgrounds outside Wichita weren't anything special, just the usual rides, food booths, and the tall barn with a peeling mural of prairie horses. Still, that night, the place felt off. I remember noticing how quiet the air was when we parked. Not dead silent, but hushed like everything was waiting. The fair was still going when we arrived, but you could tell it was winding down. Some of the food trailers were already shuttered. A few families were leaving with sleepy kids. The lights on the Ferris wheel flickered a little. Not broken, just tired. We walked the main strip, bought funnel cakes, and dared each other to go into the house of mirrors, which was more sad than scary. I don't know why it stuck out, maybe because the night felt stretched thin, but there was this photo booth wedged between a cotton candy stand and the trailer where they sold cheap leather belts. It was a little old-fashioned with chipped black paint and a dusty curtain. No one else seemed interested in it. A hand-lettered sign above it said 4 photos, $1.50. No retakes. Charlie laughed and said it looked haunted. I wish we had listened, but we crammed inside, all 3 of us, our knees pressed together, the fabric of the curtain scratchy against my arm. Denny reached out and fed quarters into the slot, and the machine whirred to life. The camera clicked once every few seconds, and we made faces, stuck out our tongues, flipped each other off the usual. Flash, 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 flash. Then the whirring stopped and the strip slowly slid out. The first 3 frames were exactly what you'd expect. Goofy grins, Denny trying to kiss Charlie's cheek me, pointing at the lens with both hands. But the 4th frame, I didn't look at it until later. I tucked the strip into my wallet and forgot about it until the next day. That's when I noticed it. Behind us in the last photo, there was a girl. Not in front of us, not beside us. Behind us. But the booth wasn't that deep. She couldn't have fit back there. Her face was partly in shadow, but her eyes were wide and unfocused, like she was staring through the back of my head. Her hair looked wet. Her mouth was just barely open. I called Charlie. He thought I was messing with him, said maybe it was a reflection. But the weird part was he checked his own strip and she was there too. Same frame, same look, same soaked hair. Denny hadn't even looked at his. He said he tossed his into the trash at the gas station on the way home. We drove back to that booth 2 days later, but the fare was gone, like it had packed up overnight. Not a tent, not a wrapper left behind. The grass was flattened, but that was it. Charlie got obsessed. He started going through old newspaper archives, trying to figure out if there'd been any accidents at the fairgrounds. He didn't find much, just the usual carnival mishaps, a broken ride here, a lost child there. But there was one article from 1996 about a girl named Ava who'd gone missing during the last weekend of the fair. Her body was never found. No suspects. Just a report that she was last seen near the west end of the grounds close to where the photo booth had been. I still remember the way Denny looked when we showed him the newspaper clipping. He got quiet, said nothing. Then he pulled out his wallet and showed us his strip of photos. He hadn't thrown it away after all. And in his last frame, she was closer, almost touching his shoulder. None of us slept much after that. Charlie started hearing tapping at his bedroom window at night. Denny said his little sister saw a girl standing in their hallway and screamed until she threw up. I moved all my stuff to the opposite end of my room, away from the closet, and started leaving the hallway light on. We tried to get in touch with the fair organizers, but it was a traveling outfit. No website, no phone number that worked. We filed a report with the county mostly because Charlie's mom insisted. Officer Delgado took it seriously enough to come out and look at the photos. I remember the way he stared at them. He didn't laugh or say it was a prank. He just asked one question. Which one of you saw her first? We never figured out what that meant. Charlie said maybe it was a curse, or maybe we'd been marked. But over time, things faded. Denny left for college and Charlie moved out to Colorado for work. We stopped talking as much. That kind of fear, it dries out in daylight. You start to convince yourself it was just a weird shadow, just a trick of the light. But every now and then I look at that strip again. I don't show it to people. I keep it in a drawer in an old envelope away from the sun. And I've noticed something. In the last frame, the one with her face, there's a slight blur at the bottom now, like a smudge or maybe a hand just starting to reach across my shoulder. I didn't see it there before. I spent most of my life working nights in garages, but in 2021, I took a contract that had me driving service trucks out into the desert when rigs broke down on the highway. It was lonely work, just me, the dark roads and the occasional stranded driver, but I didn't mind the solitude. There's something about the Nevada desert after midnight that feels older than time itself, as if the silence doesn't just surround you, but swallows you whole. On some nights, the radio barely came. In the sky stretched forever, and the road shimmered like a blade under the moon. One night in late July, I got a call from dispatch about a semi that had broken down near Goldfield. They gave me mile markers, but out there those markers can be half buried in dust and hard to see even in daylight. I drove with the windows down, the warm air pouring in, and the engine humming steady, keeping my eyes peeled for headlights that weren't moving. I finally spotted them about 40 minutes later. A semi pulled onto the shoulder with its hazards clicking in steady red pulses. When I stepped out, I noticed the heat hadn't faded much, and the desert smelled like dry iron. The truck itself was fine. No smoke, no flat tires, no leaking fluids. I knocked on the cab and waited. Nobody answered. I tried the door, found it unlocked, and climbed partway up to peek inside. The driver's seat was empty. The keys were still in the ignition. A half-drunk cup of gas station coffee sat in the holder, steam long gone, but still faintly bitter in the air. At first, I thought the driver might have walked off to relieve himself, but there was no sign of footprints, no flashlight beam moving across the sand. No movement at all. Just stillness, the kind that gets under your skin. I radioed dispatch, told them the situation, and they said the company had no record of the call being made. The voice that had sent me out hadn't been logged on their system. They patched me through to highway patrol, and an officer said he'd head my way. While I waited, I walked a slow circle around the semi, with my flashlight, the beam sliding across dry scrub and gravel. That's when I saw another set of headlights in the distance. They weren't coming down the highway. They were sitting still off the road, far back in the desert, like a car parked where no road should be. The lights blinked once, as if signaling, then went dark. I climbed back into my service truck and locked the doors, telling myself it was nothing, maybe just another driver cutting across the flats. But when I glanced at the semi's side mirror, I noticed movement. Two figures were walking slowly along the desert shoulder, both tall, both thin, keeping perfect pace with each other. They weren't headed toward me exactly, but toward the truck, almost like they had been there all along and were now returning to it. The officer arrived about 20 minutes later. His headlights washed the road in white and scattered the shadows, but the two figures were gone. I tried explaining, but there was no trace of them, no footprints in the dirt. The officer searched the cab again and ran the plates. He said the truck had been reported stolen out of Arizona 2 weeks earlier, and the listed driver had no reason to be in Nevada at all. We arranged to have the semi towed, and I followed the officer's taillights back toward town. When we hit the first bend in the road, I checked my mirror. Far back, just before the desert swallowed the view, I saw two shapes standing by the shoulder again, still as fence posts, staring at the empty stretch of highway. I never went back out on a night call after that. Someone else could answer them. The desert holds too many silences, and some of them feel like they're listening for you. That was years ago, but I still think about it whenever I drive alone at night. The strange thing about these stories is that none of them take place in places we think of as haunted. They aren't old graveyards or abandoned houses, but highways, diners, motels, and stretches of road that most people pass through without a second thought. Maybe that's why they stick with us. Because if something unsettling can happen in those ordinary places, then it can happen anywhere without warning. Each of these memories is tied to a sound or a shadow, or the feeling of being watched when no one should be there. They aren't the kind of things you can prove, not the kind of stories that come with evidence. But they don't leave you either. They settle in your memory, waiting for a quiet night to resurface, reminding you of how fragile the sense of safety really is. I don't pretend to understand what I saw or what others have lived through, but I know this: sometimes the world feels thinner. At night, and through those thin places, something else can look back. Maybe that's why we remember these stories so clearly. Not because we want to, but because forgetting them would mean stepping into the dark unprepared. Thank you for staying with me through the end of tonight's stories. If you'd like to hear more accounts like these, you can follow the channel. Share it with a friend or subscribe for future nights. And tell me, have you ever been somewhere ordinary, a place like a highway or a small town that carried a wrongness you couldn't shake? I'd like to hear your story.